My Lords, I thank the Noble Lord Scriven for securing this debate and his very powerful and clear introduction. And like the Noble Lord, I would like to begin by paying tribute to the Bahraini human rights defenders and torture survivors who are observing in the gallery today. I also wish to pay tribute to all of those who are languishing unjustly behind bars and facing unspeakable repression and the death penalty, both in Bahrain and across the Gulf region. They, of course, are unable to watch today. In August, The Times reported that the UK government has doubled its funding to Bahrain and Saudi Arabia under the controversial Gulf Strategy Fund. This is completely disregarding serious human rights concerns and its knowledge that the recipients of GSF funding in both countries have been repeatedly implicated in the perpetration and whitewashing of serious violation of human rights and international humanitarian law. Bahrain received £1.8 million in support. Saudi Arabia, who has executed a horrifying record number of people this year, something I'll come back to, received £1.8 million, and the UAE over £1.5 million. I think we have to look at that in the context of the ODA cuts, where we've seen massive collapses in British assistance to women and girls' reproductive rights, to many other crucial human rights and public health issues. Now, I can partly answer the question of the Noble Lady Baroness Featherstone about when the government is raising these issues, because on Saturday, the Secretary of State, James Cleverly, gave a speech at the Manama Dialogue in Bahrain, in which served to greenwash Gulf abuses, congratulating the states on green energy and touting the upcoming UK GCC free trade agreement from which the government has removed all human rights objectives.
I rest my case.
And the Minister, the Secretary of State, failed to mention human rights or democracy once. That's all on the record, despite the region's abysmal rights record.
That's my point.
Now, this speech was given at the same time as Bahrain held sham elections and Saudi Arabia carried out that continuing execution spree to which I referred. Now, I'm sure the Noble Lord the Minister is aware that cross-party parliamentarians have repeatedly called for the Gulf Strategy Fund to be suspended. And in October, the Human Rights Watch and the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy published new evidence implicating GSF beneficiaries in Bahrain in the use of the death penalty against torture victims like Mohammed Ramadan, Hussein Musa, Maher Abbas and Zahir Abdullah, who are all currently on death row at imminent risk of execution. On top of this, it was extremely concerning to see an October report in The Telegraph that the government, quote, may have broken its own rules by allegedly not properly assessing its financial support to the Bahrain judicial system, whose use of capital punishment should have attracted the highest level of government scrutiny, close quotes. That, of course, is something required under OSJA guidelines. Now, in August 2019, the Governance Board of the GSF, under its previous name, identified the need to, quote, rebrand the fund and reported that a root and branch overhaul was needed. A key area of improvement that identified was to strengthen, quote, the transparency, accountability and governance for the fund, close quote. Despite this, the government continues to run the GSF with a high level of secrecy and refuses to disclose OSJA assessments of its programs. Now, in response to a Freedom of Information request submitted by the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy, the government confirmed that, quote, it has neither sought nor received written assurances from the government of Bahrain, close quotes, since it could not consider that the GSF-funded projects delivered to Bahrain over the periods in question were presenting an enhanced risk of the imposition or uses of the death penalty. But the government has refused to disclose the OSJA reviews of these same projects. Now, I would ask the Minister directly if the Noble Lord will explain to the House why the government is so sure that the GSF programs provided to this body run no risk of facilitating the imposition of the death penalty, and why did they not even bother to seek assurances from Bahrain in accordance with their own policy? Can the Minister help us to understand how the UK government can possibly justify the doubling of these funds, particularly in the context of so much slashing of other official development assistance, despite the serious concerns over the recipient's involvement in horrific rights violations. Can the Minister explain how the government has not violated its own guidelines? And will the Noble Lord the Minister commit to sharing with this House the OSJ assessments that were conducted on the GSF programs in Bahrain, so the Parliament and the taxpayer can be sure that the right decision was made? Now, I've mentioned previously the horrific spree of executions currently ongoing, possibly right at this moment in Saudi Arabia. And so I am now going to raise one specific case that is of the absolute utmost urgency, which has been drawn to my attention by the organisation Reprieve. This is the case of Hussein Abu al-Kia, who is at this moment at risk of imminent execution. An elderly Jordanian man from a very poor socio-economic background. He was tortured into confessing to drug offences after being arrested in 2014. He has now spent 7 years on death row and at the weekend was moved into what's known as a death cell. His execution could happen at any moment. Now, there have been 20 drug-related executions in the past fortnight in Saudi Arabia. Now, my understanding is that ministers received assurances from the government of Saudi Arabia that there was a moratorium on executions related to drug crimes. So, direct questions to the Noble Lord the Minister. Has the government called specifically on the Saudi government to reprieve Hussein Abu al-Kia? What steps has the department taken in this specific case? Will the Noble Lord the Minister condemn this spate of executions in Saudi Arabia, which is being conducted in defiance of the assurances that the UK government received? And will the Noble Lord the Minister acknowledge that Saudi Arabia has broken its promises made to the UK government? And in the light of that, I do have to raise the fact that Saudi Arabia is an enormous customer for UK arms sales. We are pumping weapons into a state that is one of the world's most human rights repressing. Will the Noble Lord the Minister, will the Noble Lord the Minister justify to me today how we can continue Saudi arms sales? Now, finally, I would entirely associate myself with all of the remarks of the Noble Lords Hayward and Cashman about the situation in Qatar. They've covered this very powerfully and extensively, and I won't go into this at great length. But what I will raise is the related issue to the Saudi arms sales, of the extremely close military cooperation that's happening right at this moment between Qatar and the UK armed forces, particularly the RAF, in the form of joint squadrons. Now, we have British air forces working with the Qataris in a joint operation over the skies of Qatar now. Now, of course, we all want to ensure that the World Cup, the crowds, the people, the players, everybody is kept safe. But it does beg the question of what is going to happen after the World Cup is over, the continuation of this incredibly close military cooperation that I don't think most people in Britain are aware of and would, I think, be quite shocked by if they were aware of it. I ask the Noble Lord the Minister, will the government reconsider this close cooperation with a regime with such an appalling human rights record?